Hi guys, it's Professor Fernandez here, and I am excited, as I usually am, about talking about The Comet by W.E.B. Du Bois. First of all, I hope that you can hear me. My sister's next door, and she has a migraine, and my voice carries because I'm loud. Yes, I'm loud. And so I'm whispering for me, which actually ends up being a normal level of voice. So I hope you can hear me. I can barely hear myself, but that's okay. Those are whole other issues. But I'm glad to be talking about The Comet with W.E.B. Du Bois. It is an interesting story. Um, it is a difficult story to read for many reasons. For me, as your professor, it was difficult to read because I wasn't quite sure how I was going to approach the teaching of it. So many scholars have taught, written about WB, W.E.B. Du Bois and the comet. I hope, by the way, that you saw the context video of that so you understand kind of he's kind of a big deal, right? Um, and so I'm hoping that I do it justice. Um, and so I have some things I want to talk about. As always, I annotated, in case you couldn't see. That's just page one. I annotated. There were so many thoughts and themes and a lot of illusions here he's playing with. So what my goal is to hit like the bigger picture things. By now we are in week 4, which means that by now you should be annotating or learning or continuing to annotate everything you read in this class, most especially the pieces you're going to use for your research project. So annotation really is, well, it's this. Let me put up page 1 here. Annotation is all the notes that you make in the margins. Things like this is a literary device, like maybe this is imagery, this is he's using alliteration here, or anaphora, which he uses actually at least one time on the front page. Maybe there are some things that he's talking about that tie into something you've read previously, whether it's in this class or in another class. Maybe he's making an illusion, or maybe you think he's making an illusion and you want to look that up. You also want to make sure that you write a question mark or highlight or circle things you don't understand, which I did a couple of times here. So I know you did as well. You also want to see if there's anything that's repeating, like repeating words or imagery, because that can create a theme or motif. Um, and then you also want to write all the stuff that you think is cool, like maybe a cool turn of phrase or a um, cool syntax or cool diction, which he also uses fantastic diction as a writer. I was like, ooh, I may need to reread this to talk about craft here. But alas, to help aid us into not making this video longer than it needs to, I'm actually going to use a stopwatch on my Fitbit. Um, and I'm going to be looking at it when I need to see where we're at. So if you see me look at my stopwatch, I'm trying to keep it under an hour, guys. I promise I am. So let's get started. All right. So yes, difficult this. So I'm going to actually use the elements of fiction, of which if you haven't seen that video or haven't read that lesson yet, you should go and read that lesson so you know what I'm going to talk about here. I'm going to use the elements of fiction, and I'm going to use the first 5 elements of fiction, because the other ones, which is imagery and figurative language, I'm going to hit here as we talk about it. So um, I'm putting them as character, plot, setting, point of view, and theme. And when we talk about theme in 1302, especially when we're talking about literary work, like as in short stories, theme is also argument. So right now, I'm going to set theme aside. I'm not going to go for theme yet because we haven't learned to put together an argument statement yet. We will. I promise all the cool stuff is coming. I promise, but we have to learn all this stuff first. So I want to talk about character. And we have 2 characters here. We have a man and a woman, a black man and a white woman. And what's interesting about these characters, Two things jumped out at me as I was reading this. One, we don't know the names of these characters almost until the very end. We don't know it's Julia, and we don't know it's, was it James, or I don't even remember his name. This is how, like, I don't even care about that. I do, but I don't, because um, Jim is his name. So it's interesting that WB the boy, of which, again, if you haven't seen the context video, you should probably see it because he's kind of a big deal. Um, doesn't mention anything about these characters, about them physically, for a very long time. So the first character we see, he actually calls the messenger. And it's important to understand that he is identifying that character by position, because this adds to a theme that emerges here a little later, or a motif that's emerging here a little later, and we'll talk about this here in a second. And so we have this messenger, and so what we don't know, right, is that this is a black man at all. And it dawned on me, it dawned on me that I didn't know his name was Jim until the end, even though it's mentioned like right at the beginning. Because even when you're reading in the context of this, um, you don't, you think that Jim is someone else. So it's interesting, this little play that that he's doing here, right? And so Jim is someone else, and so you don't really get that, this conversation they're having about this comment at the beginning. He is Jim, Jim is him, Jim is messenger, right? But you don't get Jim until the end, where you're like, oh, you were referenced by your first name. So he was referenced by his first name, and then you don't know that he's black, but you know that something's up. So it's one of those things. It's almost like what's happening on social media now. Say that you were born in the 80s without saying that you were born in the 80s, or say that you were a millennial without saying you're a millennial. Um, it's that thing. Say that this is a black person without saying he's a black person, and how W.B. Du Bois decided to choose to talk about race and to talk about Jim being a man of color, was how everyone kind of treated him and his internal dialogue. Right. So let's take a look. I'm going to do a screen share as per usual, but this time I'm not going to use my iPad. What will we do? Okay. So we have here um, some really at the beginning, some really interesting imagery here. We have, he stood a moment on the steps of the bank, watching the human river that swirled down Broadway. Few noticed him, few ever noticed him, save in the way that stung. He was outside the world, nothing. So in this really short space, which I always admire writers when they do this really short space, he's doing a couple things. So one, he's giving you the character. It's a he. He's also giving you kind of how the world sees him, right? And almost like he, how he almost sees himself as a result. Okay, so if we're talking about mental health and how the outside hits the inside, this is a perfect example, right? So this is we have this situation happening here. Um, and we also have this point of view that's starting here. So we know that this is third person point of view, and it is a close third, and we understand it's a close third later on when we are popping in the heads of the woman and the man, and then we're seeing things from the outside, and we are kind of getting feelings and the sense of fear happening. So we have that. So we know it's third person close. And we also see that he is playing with the words here. He's playing with diction really well. When he's talking about on the steps of the bank, he's talking about bank with money in vaults, right? but he's also talking about watching a human river. So he's also talking about bank as in the bank of a river. So he's playing with words and he's playing with image. So you have the image of big tall skyscrapers, and you have the lots of people, like a massive amount of people swirling down Broadway. Now, you also have a setting here. You have setting here done a couple of ways. Broadway, it is safe to assume that this is New York just by the word Broadway. As you read it, you get some landmarks, so you know that this is New York. It also says that it's New York. So just by saying Broadway, automatically, you know, you're in New York City, you are in like the epicenter of like one of the world's biggest metropolises. You also get here another thing of setting. Setting isn't necessary. Well, no, let me stop. Setting is time and place, right? The time that things are happening in the story and the place where it's happening. But it's also the rules of the world. So the rules of the world, and if you're into fiction at all, it's called world building. The rules of the world right here are telling us that this person not only doesn't see himself in a good light, but he is not being seen as a good light. He is being seen as a nothing. And one behoves the other one, or one goes hand in hand with the other. So in this short space, we are getting character, we are getting um we are getting setting, we are getting point of view, then we are also getting imagery, and we are getting lots of great play with diction here. So he's doing two things. This is something that poets actually do as well, right? They use um two words, both meaning of the word, right? Poets do that as well. So pretty cool. And that's just paragraph one. You should really see my annotations. They're it's just everywhere. But let's keep going. All right. So we have these characters. We don't know what they are, who they are. And we also have here the plot being set up, right? And so we have when we're looking at plot, we're looking at not only the things that are happening and in the order that they are happening, because those are choices that the author makes. So these choices that the author is making also goes towards the argument that they are making, right? But we're also seeing, with plot, we're seeing the establishing of the world first. What is the world? And then something big happens and it pushes the narrative forward, which is a big, fancy, highfalutin writing term for saying cool things happen, and then the world changes, and then there's a climax, and then a, a declining action, and then the world is goes back, but it's changed in a certain type of way, right? So this is what we're getting right here. We're getting the establishment of this world right here, what it's like before the big change that happens. And every time we're reading something with narrative, something that's a short story, something that's like Cinderella or whatever, right? Anything that it's a story, that someone is telling a story, um, that it's not a that's not in verse, right? We want to look at plot and we want to look at it that way. What is the ordinary world? What is the point of no return, which is the big thing that happens? This is when the comet hits. Um, and then what is the world after the point of no return? What is the journey that they have to make? What is the goal? How do they intend to reach the goal? What is keeping them from reaching the goal? What is their setbacks? How do they reestablish that goal? And then what's the climax? What's the apex of this? And then the descending action. And then they enter a new world which looks similar to the ordinary world, but something changed. Something is a little different. It's a formula, and I know it well. So we have this, and we have this talk about this comet. So this is what's interesting about Afrofuturism. It uses a lot of sciencey things in Afrofuturism, whether it's like actual like science, like chemical science or biological science. Um, Black Panther used science, vibranium is science. So there's some sciencey things usually. In this one, we are using astronomy. We're talking about comets. Um, and so this is the world that's being established here. And we understand um, that this is not us. This is not 2021 OBS. This was written in 1920, and this is very much of its time. We know that things aren't that great here, right? Not that great here. Let's keep going. I want to talk about here. We've talked about point of view and plot and setting, and we're going to keep going on that. But I want to talk about his use of diction here. I know I've talked about diction here, but W.B. Du Bois has this play with the idea of darkness happening throughout this piece. I don't know if you caught this, but anything black or darkness, ooh, um, he is playing with here. Oh, great. I can't even undo that. Yes, I can. Um, and it's kind of interesting here because this is a world where um, this one's really cool. Blackness yawned. Awesome. Um, this is a world here where being black is not a good thing. And it's almost as if just a juxtaposition of one of his main characters in the idea of darkness, not the idea of darkness of skin, but darkness of place, darkness of character, um, is the juxtaposition kind of elevates the idea of race here and the idea of morality almost. Um, so it's fun to go back. I'm not going to talk about this anymore. You should probably go back and just highlight all the places where he talks about darkness or blackness. So sometimes he'll say dim light or cavern or dark, right? Instead of just black. And so I would highlight all those and talk and just see how he's weaving the idea of darkness and blackness in juxtaposition to race in this. Because it's really interesting. That almost sounds like a whole paper. Oh my God. That would be really interesting to see, I think. Um, let's also talk about his use of personification here, which I think is kind of awesome. He does this a lot. He does this really cool thing with personification. Right here, where he talks about blackness yawned beyond, right? He talks about personification here. Um, he talks about it here with the last low groan laid bare, its treasure, gold. Uh, he talks about this door groaning, right? It's just bowels. He's literally in the bowels of a building and it's dark and it's pitch black. And this door that he is trying to open, or this chest he's trying to open groans, as in he's just like, ooh. It's just eerie. Um, but it's this personification of almost like something coming alive. He is personifying this eeriness or this blackness, this being in the bowels of something, as something that is coming alive. And then you get this big, loud booming, which is the comet coming and killing everybody. Everybody. I can't say that the science of this isn't great. The science of this is whack as all get out, but give him some grace. This is 1920. So yeah, the science of this is whack, but everything else works really well, really, really well, really, really well. Let's talk about alliteration here because I swear the boys used alliteration like it was the only literary term to use in the history of literary terms. So here's one here, since we're on this page. Fell fainting across the corpse. Um, so you have this F sound here, and if you don't remember from the last lesson, alliteration is the consonant sounds usually at the beginning of a word. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the beginning, um, but usually is. Then you also have in the next column here, wonder written on his lips. If I could find it here. I can't find it, but I know it's there. Yeah, here it is. Wonder written on his lips. So he does this often, and there's a really great section here where he's using the S sound very purposely, and we're gonna get to that when we get to that page right quick. Um, he is using alliteration um, and playing with sounds here. So you have the sound when you're talking about he's stepping closer, clutching at air. It's almost like the air is letting out. You also have um, the silk hatted and frocked who had crept to along the smooth wall and now stood some stone dead with wonder written on his lips. It's almost like the sound of that frock moving. So he's playing with images and he's playing with sounds, as if he wanted the reader to feel some type of emotion. Right, this is a catastrophic thing. Imagine being in 1920, and this is part of a bigger work. um, I forgot what it was called, but as part of a bigger work, it's the last story in a collection that includes essays and poetry. So this is the only fiction piece in that collection. And so the whole idea of writing this, um, and putting this alliteration here and putting these images here is because you want your reader to feel something. This is the um, this is the fiction writer's way to do ethos. We talked about ethos before, right? No, sorry, pathos. Talked about pathos before, which is an appeal, um, which is emotion. They want um, the writer wants you to feel emotion. Well, sorry, pathos doesn't really go with fiction, but you know what does? Imagery and alliteration does. And so these type of literary devices help put the reader, or attempt to put the reader, right where they are. There's a feeling of impending doom. There's a feeling of like the air leaving the room sometimes when you read this. Um, there's a feeling of anger. Um, I had a lot of WTF moments literally in the margins here. There may have been a couple of bad words written right next to it. They're my notes, not yours. But um, so this is how he does it. This is how he's creating this argument. He also does this by taking the reader right to the edge of like a thought and not completing it. And he does this twice. He does it a couple of times, but there are two times I want to point out here. In this one, this was when I had my WTF moments. And so we look at this part where we have the little girl. He's looking at a little girl who is dead, unfortunately. And she is looking up towards the skies, and right next to her is a carriage. And in this case, again, 1920. So I've got to translate carriage means like a baby carriage, right? And in the carriage, by her lay, but the messenger looked no longer, right? And so there's a carriage next to her, a baby carriage, but he doesn't go and tell you that the baby's dead, right? He's taking the reader right up to that point and then letting the reader jump to their own conclusions. So it's he does this several times. He does it here, and he does it. He does it in a he does it. Hmm, he does it on page 58. So let me go here. I was very much like, just say it. Just say it. Um, so she's looking at the receiver, right? Um, at the phone, Julia, the white woman, and it was wide and black and pimpled with usage, inert, dead, almost sarcastic in its unfeeling curves. It looked like she beat back the thought, but it persisted in looking like she turned her head and found herself alone. He doesn't tell you what this looks like. He lets you jump. I'm not going to tell you what it looks like. I think it looks like a gun. I told you. But it's up to the reader, right? And it's almost like he is building all this tension, awesome tension, and he's not purposely not telling you things because he wants to let your fear or your upsetness fill in the blank. Such a mean man. Okay. So we have that happening there. And again, he is playing with images throughout this thing, like this idea here of this cryptic sphinx-like immobility. He does this particular um that particular image a couple of times. This is like an Egyptian image. He does this Egyptian image again towards the end on page 60. Okay, page 60, where are you? Okay, does it again on page 60. And then hold up. The shackles seemed to rattle and fall from his soul. Up from the crass and crushing and cringing of his cast leaped the lone majesty of kings long dead. He arose within the shadows, tall, straight, and stern, with power in his eyes and ghostly scepters hovering in his grasp. It was as though some mighty pharaoh had lived again and curled a Assyrian lord. He turned and looked upon the lady and found her gazing straight at him. So you have these Egyptian images, and he's playing a little bit with mythology. So you have an illusion. So let me stop and define illusion in case you don't know. Illusion is when you are alluding to or referencing something. It could be something from a story, something from maybe the Bible, something from politics, whatnot. He is alluding here to Egypt and Pharaoh and the beginning of beginning of a civilization, a mighty civilization that happens to be an African civilization, um, that rose up to great power, great wealth, and great knowledge. And so he is making this allusion right here to the Egyptians. And the beginning of this new world order of which he was talking about. But I don't want to jump ahead. I'm going to jump back, okay? I'm going to jump back. There's lots of things. He is doing the absolute most in the story, and I love him for it. So I want to go back to talked about the baby carriage. Yes, I want to talk about here this class system and the idea of race, and then the first descriptions that we get of the messenger and of Julia. Okay, and then I want to talk about God, of which W.E.B. Du Bois was talking about God. So I want to talk about um, 1920s America. And 1920s America, you have, of course, it's the Roaring Twenties. You have jazz and blues. If you've ever seen Chicago, there you go. There's your reference point there. Um, but we also have Jim Crow. And we also have um a caste system, and of which people of color are at the bottom, no matter if they have money or not. Money doesn't matter um, as much. It mattered right after the Depression, of course, because no one had any, um, or few people had any. So he's playing with a class system and with race, and so he is actually posing a question, and he poses this question on page 55, um, right where Jim finds the money, or finds the gold. And this is the question he is playing with. So every writer plays with a question. They seek to find the answer to the question that they pose in the story, right? Or they seek to find the answer by writing the story. So this is the question he's asking, and this is the question that perhaps this story is trying to answer. If they were to find him here alone with all this money and all these dead men, what would his life be worth? So we're talking about the worth of a life. Again, he's doing a callback here to the beginning part of this story where, if you noticed him and like he wasn't worth anyway. He wasn't worth anything. And ironically, he works at a bank, right? The juxtaposition of him working at a bank and him not being worthless, it is palpable. It says something about America in the 1920s, and what is worth saving and what is not. And so this is the story. This is the question he's asking. Um, what is his life worth? What is life worth? What is a black man's life worth? What is a white woman's life worth? What is life worth in general? And so because he's answering this question, he creates the scenario where everyone dies, and the only people who are alive are a black man and a white woman, right? So let's talk about this also idea of this description here on page 56. Did I pass it? No. On page 56, we have the first time description of the messenger here. Um, and this is through Julia's eyes. So, second column, page 56. And she has. Wait, where are you? Yet, as she looked at him curiously, he seemed quite commonplace and usual. That is where I want to start this. It's just really hard to find everything that I need on this thing. It's over here somewhere. So on my copy, it says, yet as she looked at him curiously, he seemed quite commonplace and usual. He was a tall, dark working man of better class, with a sensitive face, trained to stowability and a poor man's clothes and hands. I can read, I promise. His face was soft and slow, and his manner at once cold and nervous, like fires long baked but not out. That's where I was looking at. So we get a chance to see who Jim is here, um, and even what he thought about kind of his role here, right? Here, this woman, obviously of means, is looking at him, and he's saying yesterday he thought with bitterness she would scarcely have looked at him twice. He would have been dirt beneath her silken feet. She stared at him. All sorts of men she had pictured as coming to her rescue. She had not dreamed of one like him. Not that he was not human, but he dealt in a world far from hers, so infinitely far that he seldom even entered her thought. So we have class, we have race happening here. So there's a lot. It's a couple of levels of um, crap that they've got to get through, being the essentially the last man and woman on earth, right? And yes, the W.E.B. Du Bois is building up to an Adam and Eve type of thing. Absolutely. If you did not see that coming, I don't know what to tell you. I saw that comment on like page 2, but okay. He is building up to Adam and Eve, and because he's building up to Adam and Eve, he's making that allusion to that biblical story, and he's also making a lot of religious allusions to this biblical story. For example, how they are both saved is that they were in dark places, right? She had been shut up in the dark room developing pictures of the comet, which she took last night. When she came out, she saw the dead. He, Jim, was in the bowels of a bank and then emerged. So they both emerged from dark places. It's like they were reborn, right? You have Adam and Eve coming from dark places and they're reborn. Um, or they are born into this idea or into this thing. We also have here when they discuss a lot about um, their situation, and he really um, they really hammer this in, or the boys really hammers this in of the spirituality. Something, comet or devil, swept across the earth this morning and many are dead. Clearly it was the comet, but he's bringing in this spirituality, he's bringing in this religion. He also does a couple of other times talk about religion. He talks about death, silence being evil, or silence being death, right? And that idea of, because there's no more noise, there's no more voices telling you right from wrong. So there is a morality there that is no longer there. The rules are being thrown out, right? What is morality now if there's no one to tell you what that is? It's kind of what he's saying right here. Everywhere was silence and death, death and silence. So, what do you do to fill the silence? That's another question that, of course, that he's asking, being very existential, Mr. Du Bois is. All right. So he has that reference to religion. He also has page 58. I will give you one more example of religious references here. It was almost, it was as if she had heard the last flicker of creation. The evil was silence. I don't know what else to tell you. Right. So he's making a lot of references, a lot of religious references. So it's it's similar in that it's similar to King in that he does bring in religious morality to his argument about segregation. Um, W.B. Du Bois is making a similar argument, but in a different way. He is bringing in religion as illusion. He's almost bringing it in religion as motif, right? He's bringing in big civilizations like the Egyptians um, as a huge giveaway. Um, so it's almost like a return to something. The Egyptians believing in many gods and not just one. So he's not even going with the classic Judeo Christian idea of religion. He's grasping at any religion, really. Um, and so when there is silence, you create things, right? If I were to have a conversation with you and not talk for a little bit, I wouldn't say anything, but you would try to say something to fill the silence. People are uncomfortable with silence. And so if there are no rules anymore and everyone's dead, you create your own rules. Who's going to check you? So that's the idea here. I want to get to this amazing use of alliteration here um, on page 58. I hope you're not bored. I'm at 35 minutes. All right, let's go. Page 58. We have the S sound of alliteration. So he's been playing with alliteration a couple of times here. Um, he had the HHH sound right above here. Her heart hammered. It's almost a breathless sound, right? And so she almost rose to a shriek, right? She was breathless. Ha ha ha, her heart hammered. It's almost also a laugh, right? As if someone is laughing because he's also talking about evil in the next sentence. So he's making these references of Adam and Eve, man. It's like everywhere you go in this story. Everywhere you go in this story. I'm even finding some as I'm reading through, and I've read through this and I'm finding it. Here's another one, and this is alliteration, okay? This entire paragraph has the S sound in it. So she stopped. She was alone, alone on the streets, alone in the city. Doesn't necessarily have to be an S, has to be the S sound. City, perhaps alone in the world. There crept upon her the sense of deception, of creeping hands behind her, of silent, moving things she could not see, of voices hushed in fearsome conspiracy. She looked behind the sideways, the whole word, started at strange sounds. Started means startled. At strange sounds and heard still stranger. They're getting hard now, until every nerve within her stood sharp and quivering, stretched to scream at the barest touch. I'm going to stop right there. But do you see all those S's? Is that S sound? There's two types of S sounds here, like a high S sound and a low S sound. And this is one of those reasons why I'm always going to say you should do a couple of readings of a story or a poem, and poem is really a lot easier to do a short reading than a longer piece like this one. So you should do a second reading on this because you can catch stuff like this. I did not catch this until the second reading. It's very easy to miss this because this is the point where you have almost like a part of the plot where action is happening more and more and more, and she is scared here. She is alone with a black man, and she is afraid that he is going to rape her. Hands down. He is afraid that he's going to rape her, and there's nobody there to protect her. Literally, I have a note that says, "Girl, ain't nobody wants you." That literally says that. But that is her fear. But that is pretty much every woman's fear. If they not every woman's fear, but most women's fear, if they are alone with a man who is a stranger and there's nobody there, that's probably one of the first things you think. Am I in danger? Is he going to hurt me in some way? And this is where she's thinking that, right? And so we have this S sound, and it's in the same proximity of the idea of evil here. So you have a serpent sound, you have the snake sound, and he has been setting up Adam and Eve this entire time. So this is not a coincidence. This is not he just happened to write these words and this diction just happened to pop up, right? And this was, a rush at the 11th hour to finish the story. No, this was purposely put in there. These sounds were purposely put in there in juxtaposition of his idea of evil and blackness happening very in close proximity to this. know, it's very artful, isn't it? Okay. I am at 40 minutes and I'm going to try to tie this up here. Another story, another question that he is trying to figure out is what is human? What is humanity? What is considered human? Throughout this entire piece, the messenger is considered or it has been referenced as being non-human. He's referenced as non-human not only by the way he is treated, by how he sees himself as a result of how he's treated, but also by this woman, the essential Eve to his Adam. She eventually sees him in another light. When she finally starts to accept that this is it, it's me and him, I guess we're gonna be making these babies. Um, is literally what's going through her mind. So, um, he is not only unhuman, but really an alien, right? He is just something otherworldly. He is a nothing, something otherworldly. And so Dubois is also playing with the idea of what makes a human. In this case, where there is only a black man and a white woman, I guess the black man is now a human, right? I guess he's human now. And so does it take the death uh, of an entire group of people, from a comet to essentially give somebody their humanity? That's another question she's asking. Does he answer it? I don't know. It seems like a good idea to figure that out on your own. Okay, moving on. All right. Let me give you one more Adam and Eve example. Because why not? Last Adam and Eve example here. If you hear my sister, she sounds like she's getting better here. Her migraine, she's still on the migraine, so I apologize if you couldn't hear me earlier. All right, so he talks about the angel of Annunciation. So, reference your Bibles, Google that. Um, and so she realizes here she is by herself. Um, am I on page 16? No wonder I can't find it. She is by herself, and so we understand here how death is the leveler and the revealer, right? So we went from silence being death and silence being evil to death being the leveler. And again, we talked about how Jim, the black man, has been given his humanity through death. He's given his humanity because everybody's dead, right? So he's no longer an alien. And so we have this idea here of the angel of Annunciation. She was no mere woman. She was neither high nor low, white nor black, rich nor poor. She was a primal woman, mighty mother of all men to come and pride of life. Eve. She looked upon the man beside her and forgot all else but his manhood, his strong, virtuous, vigorous manhood, his sorrow and sacrifice. She saw him glorified. He was no longer a thing apart, a creature below, a strange outcast of another clime and blood, but her brother humanity incarnate, son of God and great all father of the race to be. Adam. So again, we have all these things and ideas that he's playing with. He's questioning um he's questioning a lot of things. So the original question, of course, that he was playing with comes from the very first page here, or second page, I should say. Um, what would his life be worth if they found him there with all this money? If he had all the money, but everybody was dead, what would his life be worth? And so this is the question the big general question. And under those questions, we have the thought of what would it take for a Black man to be human, or to be, have a person of color to be human. Because we see Julia in in her humanity, um, but we also see Jim um, as dark and shadowy, almost as a threat to her, even though she's is saving her. Um, and then he gets his humanity when there is no other life out there, right? And so, is that what it will take? This is probably the argument that he is making here. Is that what it would take for a Black man to be seen as human, not alien, to be seen as a son of God, or to be seen as an Adam to everyone's Eve? So it's an interesting thing. I don't think it is a coincidence that Jim is a messenger. His job title is a messenger, but he is also a messenger. Again, another biblical references. There's so much biblical stuff in here. Like, I knew there was, but didn't know it was to this extent. So it was interesting to read it and find them all, or find most of them. I'm sure there's more. And I actually saw a couple as I was um, interpreting this on this video. I'm going to end with this, my friend. We have the end, right? The end. So we're going to go back to plot. And this idea of now we are Adam and Eve is the apex, it is the climax. You're at the top. And then you have the descending action. Hong Kong, who it is, but her father and her husband. And we have this bad taste in our mouth at the end here, where we have um Fred saying, the world is gone, but I'm here and we're fine and blah, blah, blah. And then they turn and look at Jim and say, has he dared? It's a N word. Has he dared? That's the first thing they think about, right? The first thing they think about, has he dared touch you? Right? And so her reaction here is, Um, she lifted her head and looked at her late companion curiously, and then dropped her eyes with a sigh. He has dared all to rescue me, she said quietly, and I thank him much. But she did not look at him again. As the couple turned away, the father drew a roll of bills from his pockets. So she gives him his props, but then she turns away from him, even though moments earlier she was just thinking, we're going to have to repopulate this world. We are now Adam and Eve. We are now the mother and daughter of this new humanity that we're going to create, and we are now making the rules, right? Remember I said there was no morality, there's no rules in silence. You make your own rules. And so now the silence is gone and the old rules come back. And so as for the reader, that idea of it, what will it take for a Black man to be human? This is where you get your answer. It takes silence, it takes death, it takes everyone being dead to be able to become a son of Adam, a proper son of Adam, essentially. And this is where you get this answer. And as a reader, I got a really bad taste in my mouth, and I wanted to like punch people. And then you get this sucker punch at the end of a woman. It doesn't say that it's his wife. It doesn't say it. There's a woman. He has a baby cap in his pocket. This is when they went to go visit Harlem. And she has the corpse of a dark baby. He says a dark baby. See, again with the dark motif. Um, the corpse of a baby. She says, Jim, he whirled around with a sob of joy, caught her in his arms. So it's just, you walk away with this piece with just WTF, what just happened? And then you sit with this a little bit and you're like, wow, he is literally saying that it would take a restorative civilization for Black people to be equal to everybody. That's what he's saying. And that is the argument, one of many. There's several here. I'm just going for that one because it's the easy get. But that is what he is saying. So I'm going to leave it to you. I am at the 51-minute mark. Sorry, I didn't make it any sooner than that. I thought I was going to make it at 45. I was wrong. But here we are. It's an interesting piece. It is a piece with lots to say. If I were to read this again, maybe in a couple of weeks, I would get additional things. Um, if you're looking for something to write about for your research project, this is actually pretty good. This is really in depth. Um, if you have a research project that talks, there's a couple of you have an interesting research project um, that you could use this story for. You don't necessarily have to use essays. It's easy to use essays, but it's also fun to use short stories as well. So, with that, I am done showing you all the things or showing you some of the things. I only didn't even get through half of what I have. I only got through like a fourth. My notes are extensive. So I hope that you got what you needed. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you soon, guys. Bye.